I find myself kind of second guessing a lot of things. Because I realize one day I'm going to have to stand before the Lord. When we go soul winning, it's kind of a novel idea, but I actually want to win souls. When we talk to people about the Lord, I actually want people to get saved. I have to admit that there's been times because we were in a hurry or because it was close to noon or we were going to meet somebody for lunch, you just almost rush through. And you're almost like, blah, 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 let's get here. Hey, do you want to pray or not? You know, you want to pray? Let's pray. You want me to help you? I mean, what do you want to do? You know, and you're almost rushing somebody with something so important as their eternity. And maybe I'm the only unspiritual person that's ever done that before. Or maybe we haven't had somebody saved in a long time. And so sometimes you almost just want to get somebody to pray. I want to be very careful with this. But there's a difference between getting somebody to pray and somebody getting saved. I believe in my heart of hearts that there's a lot of people who prayed the sinner's prayer that are no more saved than a chihuahua. And I'm pretty sure all chihuahuas are going to hell. But it's so good it's not that we don't intentionally, want to notch our belt. We don't intentionally want to, but I think that when we start out, we're teaching soul winning or participating in soul winning, you want to see people saved. That's natural, and you realize that, hey, if somebody will just call upon the name of the Lord, they can be saved. But they have to know what they're talking about. They have to know what they're asking for. They have to understand the gospel. They have to know. I mean, we're not just trying to get them to check a box and sign their name. The other day, there was we had signed up for something. It was like carbonite backup for the computer or McAfee or Norton or something, to protect the computer. And anything on the computer, it always gives you this one easy box that says, I have read and understand the terms of service. And nobody ever reads the terms of service. If you do, you have way too much time on your hands. But you just kind of look and you go, hey, it's McAfee, it's Norton, it's carbonite, it's okay, except I read it, even though you didn't really read it. I understand it, even though you probably don't have a clue what it says. And that's your signature. You just do it, even though you don't understand, and you accept. That's it. As I was doing that process, again, the other day, not really realizing what I was probably signing, not really realizing what I was saying I understood, I thought, that's how soul winning goes a lot of times, I'm afraid. See, I just assume because Carbonite has commercials on the radio that I can trust them. They're not going to rip me off somehow. I just trust that because McAfee or Norton, they're supposed to protect my computer. Surely they're honest and safe, and we make some assumptions, and because of that, surely their terms of service are not going to be grievous to me. It won't be bad. I don't really have to understand it all. I'll just accept it and go on. I'm afraid it's not so easy. See, if I just click yes on the computer, I get to experience all the benefits of using the product. I don't have to understand. But when it comes to salvation, I think that there are some essential things that you do have to understand. We were in a shopping place a few days ago, and a missionary was talking to some people, and there was a language barrier. The missionary knew Romanian and Croatian and knew those languages, and there were some similarities with Spanish, but they were Spanish speakers. Well, I know enough Spanish, like order dinner really good. I could communicate a little bit. I tell people I don't speak Spanish, but I communicate in Spanish. I can usually get my point across. And we've led some people to the Lord in Spanish. So we were finishing up and we were getting ready to leave the area. And all of a sudden, this Spanish guy comes over to me and he asked me in Spanish, what is the significance of the gospel? And I was looking at him, I was like, what do you mean? And he asked me, he did what I do. When I say something in Spanish and somebody doesn't understand me, I just say it again, exactly the way I said it before, hoping for a different result. So he asked me again, what is the significance of the gospel? And then I looked over and the missionary's like, yeah. I was like, oh, okay. Missionary sent him over. So I began to explain to him how that most people believe that there's a God and that there's a heaven where God lives and we would like to go there, but we can't go there. We don't qualify to go there. And I was trying to explain, because we have bad thoughts and because we have sin, that if we were allowed to carry our bad thoughts and our sin to heaven with us, heaven wouldn't be heaven anymore. If we could drag our filth, the filth of this flesh, to heaven, we would dirty the place up. And so our sin has to be dealt with. And so I was explaining about pecado, that means sin, and how we were all pecadores, and that means sinner. And we had to have our pecados cubierto, or covered with the sangre de Cristo, the blood of Christ. And so we went through, and I was beginning to go through Romans 3:10 and 3:23 with them, and really, I promise, paraphrasing. I don't have them memorized in Spanish. And so as we began to go, all of a sudden, I was talking to just one fella, but because our group had left, all of the employees came over, and suddenly I was preaching a salvation message to 7 people. And God blessed, and man, the words seemed to come pretty easy in Spanish, and usually I fumble really bad in English or Spanish, but it just seemed to come really easy this time in Spanish. And so I felt like that the presentation of the gospel was there. The presentation of the gospel was accurate. And so as I presented the gospel to these 7 Hispanic people, I knew at one point, you kind of feel like, in a human sense, in a prideful way, you're like, okay, I've got them in the palm of my hand. And if I tell them to pray, they'll all bow their heads and say a prayer right now. But there was something inside me that just said, they need to stew on this for a minute. Now, I could have got some numbers, and I could have certainly bowed my head and enticed these guys to pray, and ladies, there were several, all right then. And probably 5 or 6 of them would have bowed their heads and prayed right in that moment, in that second. And I knew that once we left, we weren't going to be back in that area for a long time. But yet there was something inside me that just said, they need to stew on this for a minute. So I retrieved some gospel. I asked them if they understood, and they seemed fairly clear. But it wasn't completely clear. So I retrieved some gospel tracts that are very, very thorough. They're actually created by one of our church members. They're extremely thorough. If you can read this gospel tract and not understand how to get to heaven, you're hopeless. They're that simple. And so after preaching the gospel to them, I made sure that they all knew how to read. And I gave them the gospel tracts. And I asked them to please consider what I had said, and then the scriptures that were in this paper. And I told them to prayerfully consider their situation. You go, are you kidding me? You could have got 5 of them saved. Here's the deal. Maybe I could have got 5 of them, but I'm not sure that God would have got 5 of them. And you say, I don't understand. Then you need to pray about how you're soul winning. I could have got 5, but I don't know that God would have got 5. My prayer is not that I can get somebody to say a prayer. My prayer is that people end up in heaven. And I want them to pray. And I want them to call upon the name of the Lord, and I want them to be saved. For real. And sometimes you just can't do that in 4 minutes. Sometimes you can't do that. In fact, rarely can you do that in 4 minutes. Unless somebody's already planted a lot of seed and there's been a lot of watering being done. But I know that there's not a single Baptist church anywhere near that landmass where we were. And I know that these people have not had the truth preached to them. And so rather than get some false professions, I wanted them to have the truth. And they have everything. I told them everything they need to know to go to heaven. I handed them in writing everything they need to know to go to heaven. And I'm not trying to say, well, so my hands are washed of them and hey, their blood's on their own hands. I'm just saying I wanted to be responsible. I don't want to give somebody, I don't want to go and go, hey, buddy, you want to go to heaven? Well, hey, repeat this prayer and you're off to the races. You can get hit by a truck tonight and it'll be just fine. I don't want to give people, you know why? Because I'm going to have to stand before God one day. And because I have to stand before God one day, I don't want to be sloppy in soul winning. And because I have to stand before God one day, I don't want to go around and have some astronomical amount of number of people that I'm claiming that are saved and actually a minuscule amount of number are actually going to heaven. I would rather be surprised by the number that were there in a good way than a bad way. And I'm not saying we have to put people through a semester of Bible college. And I certainly don't suggest that they have to show some good works and they have to do this and that. But they have to know that they understand. It's not checking a box like on the computer. Do you accept the terms of service? Accept. It's accepting Christ and the finished work of Calvary, realizing that there's nothing they could do in themselves to get to heaven. Realizing that there's no amount of times you can be baptized to get into heaven. Realizing that there's no amount of money you can give to get into heaven. There's no amount of times you can go to church to get into heaven. There is no church membership or a church position that can get you into heaven. The only thing that can get us into heaven is the blood of Christ. And we have to put our faith and trust right there.